Before I tell you this story, I need you to do something for me. I want you to go over to your window and look outside. Notice the mundane things. The streetlights casting their ordinary, orange glow. The sound of a distant car. The gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. Take a good, long look at that normal, predictable world, because after I tell you what happened to me on Kholat Syakhl, the mountain of the dead, you might find that the normal world doesn't feel quite so safe anymore. You might start listening a little more closely to the wind, and you might start wondering what's really out there in the dark, just beyond the reach of those streetlights. My name is Jake Miller, and I'm a location sound recordist. It's not a glamorous job. Mostly, it involves telling highly paid actors to stop rustling their jackets and battling the noise of air conditioners. For 10 years, it was a career of predictable problems and logical solutions. Until the winter of 2023. That was the year I took a job that not only broke all the rules of logic but also broke me. In a way I'm still trying to piece back together. The email came from a producer named Liam Donahue. He was a rising star in the world of high-end documentaries. The kind that get bought by streaming giants for small fortunes. He was ambitious, a little arrogant, but brilliant. His pitch was simple, but it was a holy grail for anyone interested in unsolved mysteries. Dyatlov. The final hypothesis. Everyone knows the basics of the Dyatlov Pass incident. In 1959, 9 experienced Soviet hikers went into the Ural Mountains and never came back. When rescuers found their camp, their tent was cut open from the inside. Their bodies were found scattered down the slope, some nearly a mile away, dressed in little more than their underwear in sub-zero temperatures. Some had massive internal injuries, crushed ribs, fractured skulls, but with no external signs of a struggle. One was missing her tongue. Theories ranged from an avalanche to secret military weapons tests to a UFO encounter to an attack by the local Mansi people. Nothing ever fit all the facts. Liam's angle was different. He argued that for 60-plus years, everyone had been guessing. He was going to end the guessing game. He'd secured a massive budget and unprecedented access from the Russian authorities. His plan was to bring a team of experts back to the exact location, at the exact time of year, armed with 21st-century technology. We had ground-penetrating radar to look for anything buried beneath the snow, magnetometers to detect magnetic anomalies, thermal imaging drones, and, of course, my own highly sensitive audio equipment. The idea was to create a complete sensory profile of the mountain, to capture every sound, every temperature fluctuation, every magnetic ripple, and see if the mountain itself would give up its secret. We weren't just investigating the mystery, we were going to put ourselves right in the middle of it. I said yes immediately. It was the job of a lifetime. Our team was small, elite. Besides Liam, our director, there was Anya Petrova, a Russian-American historian and a walking encyclopedia on the Dyatlov case. She was stoic, serious, and had the kind of quiet intensity that made you listen whenever she spoke. Then there was Connor, our drone pilot and tech specialist. He was young, cocky, a genius with anything that had a circuit board, and he treated the expedition like it was the world's most extreme video game. Finally, there was Ben, the lead cameraman. Ben was the veteran, a grizzled old pro who had filmed in war zones and on Arctic expeditions. He was quiet, almost unnervingly calm, and he had a look in his eyes that said he'd already seen it all. And then there was me, the sound guy, the one whose job it was to listen. We flew by helicopter from Ivdel, the last bastion of civilization, into the vast, silent wilderness of the northern Urals. The flight itself was humbling. Below us was an endless sea of white and green, a landscape so immense and empty it felt prehistoric. The mountains rose up to meet us, jagged and indifferent, when the pilot pointed out our destination. A rounded, windswept shoulder of rock and ice. A strange quiet fell over the chopper. It was Kholat Syakhl, even the name, which translates from the Mansi language as Mountain of the Dead, felt heavy. The pilot dropped us in our mountain of gear and promised to be back in 2 weeks. Watching that helicopter shrink into a black dot against the endless white sky was the first moment I felt it, a profound, bone-deep sense of isolation. We were 5 people on a speck of hostile rock, hundreds of miles from the nearest road, The silence that rushed in to fill the void left by the rotor blades was absolute. It wasn't just quiet, it was a physical presence. It pressed in on you. A heavy blanket of nothing. The first few days were exactly what you'd expect. They were cold, brutally so, but also exhilarating. We established our base camp in the relative shelter of the tree line, just below the pass itself, not far from where the original team had made their final camp. The work was methodical. Connor sent his drones up, mapping the terrain. Ben captured stunning, desolate vistas. Anya walked the ground, pointing out landmarks from the 1959 search and rescue photos. Her voice low and reverent. And I set up my equipment, planting sensitive microphones in the snow, wearing my headphones, and just listening. I listened to the moan of the wind as it scraped across the pass. I listened to the crystalline crunch of our boots on the old, hard-packed snow. I listened to the soft hiss of the gas stove in our communal tent. It was the soundtrack of survival, simple and clean. On the third night, I was doing a routine check of the ambient recordings, huddled in my small personal tent. When I first heard it, it was the first red flag. The kind the prompt for this story asks about. The kind that's so small, so easy to dismiss, that you almost convince yourself it didn't happen. Through my professional-grade headphones, underneath the ever-present sigh of the wind, there was another sound. It was a hum, a low-frequency, almost sub-audible hum. It wasn't mechanical, like a generator. It wasn't natural, like the drone of insects or the rumble of distant seismic activity. It was a steady, resonant tone, almost like a single, impossibly deep bass note being held forever. I took the headphones off. I couldn't hear it. The only sound was the nylon of my tent flapping in the wind. I put them back on. There it was, faint, but undeniably there. My first thought was equipment malfunction. A ground loop, interference from our power supply. 100 technical things it could be. I spent the next hour troubleshooting, unplugging cables, swapping out microphones, isolating every component. The hum remained. It wasn't my gear. The microphones were simply picking up a sound that was actually present in the environment. A sound my own ears were not sensitive enough to hear. I mentioned it to Connor the next morning. He just laughed. It's the Urals, man, he said, not looking up from his drone controller. Place is probably full of magnetic ore. You're probably picking up the Earth's core singing a love song. Don't worry about it. I wanted to believe him. It was the logical explanation. So I pushed it aside. I made a note in my log. Anomalous low-frequency resonance. Constant. Source unknown. And tried to forget about it. But the thing about being a sound guy is that you can't unhear something. For the rest of the day, even with my headphones off, I could almost feel it. A subtle vibration in the fillings of my teeth. At the very edge of my perception. It was the baseline of the mountain. And it felt ancient and wrong. The next red flag came 2 days later. And this one, we all experienced. We had hiked up to the pass itself to the spot where the Dyatlov tent was found. The wind was relentless up there. A physical force that stole the breath from your lungs. Anya was explaining the layout of the original camp. Her voice strained against the gale. When Liam pointed towards the sky. What the hell is that? We all looked up. To the south, hanging in the deep, violet twilight of the Arctic evening, were lights. They weren't airplanes. They weren't satellites. They were soft, orange orbs, maybe 7 or 8 of them, moving in a slow, silent, and utterly non-random formation. They moved with a strange, fluid grace, shifting positions, pulsing gently, before arranging themselves in a perfect, straight line. Then, one by one, they winked out of existence. Nobody spoke for a full minute. The only sound was the screaming wind. Connor, the tech-obsessed skeptic, was the first to break the silence. Military flares. Has to be. Maybe some kind of high-altitude weather balloon tests. But his voice lacked its usual confidence. Flares don't move like that. They don't form perfect lines and then vanish. Anya was pale, her eyes wide. They saw them in 59. She whispered, almost to herself. The search party and other witnesses in the area. They all reported seeing strange orange spheres in the sky around the time of the incident. Ben, ever the pragmatist, just grunted and raised his camera. But by then there was nothing to film but an empty sky. We went back to camp that night feeling different. The casual, professional atmosphere was gone, replaced by a tense, unspoken anxiety. The mountain no longer felt empty. It felt like it was watching us. That night, the hum in my headphones seemed louder, more insistent, and underneath it, I started to hear something else. Faint, sporadic pops and crackles, like static, or like, and this thought sent a shiver down my spine. Someone whispering just out of the range of intelligibility. I told myself it was auditory pareidolia, the brain creating patterns out of random noise. The wind, the static, that's all it was. But I didn't sleep much that night. I just lay there, listening to the hum and the crackles, and the sound of my own heart hammering against my ribs. The escalation point, the moment this went from a creepy camping trip to a genuine survival situation, happened on day 7. A storm was rolling in, the sky turning a bruised, heavy gray. We decided to pack up the equipment on the pass and hunker down at base camp until it passed. When Connor and I went to retrieve one of his remote sensor packages near a rocky outcrop, we found it. It was Anya's personal tent, or what was left of it. She preferred to sleep slightly apart from the main group, claiming the snoring from the communal tent distracted her. Her small, one-person tent was now a wreck of shredded nylon and bent poles. But it wasn't the storm. The damage was too specific. A single, long slash ran down the side, from the peak to the ground. It was a clean cut, almost surgical, like it had been made with an impossibly long, sharp knife. Anya had been with us all morning. The tent had been fine when we left. This had happened in broad daylight, while we were just a few hundred yards away. "It's a bear," Connor said instantly, but again, the bravado in his voice was paper thin. We all knew it wasn't a bear. There were no tracks in the snow. None at all, apart from our own. A bear would have clawed and ripped and made a mess. This was deliberate, precise. Liam went ballistic, not with fear, but with rage. He was convinced it was the local Mansi people, that they were trying to scare us off. They did this in '59. And they're doing it again, he yelled, his face red with fury in the biting wind. Anya shook her head, her face ashen. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "The Mansi are peaceful. They consider this mountain sacred and haunted. They wouldn't come up here. Especially not in this weather. They believe something else lives here." "Something else?" Connor scoffed, but his eyes were darting around, scanning the empty, snow-covered slopes. "Like what? The Russian Bigfoot? They call it Menk," Anya said softly, "but it is not an ape. It is something else. Something that can walk without leaving tracks." That was it, the last thread of our scientific, rational expedition snapped. We were no longer investigators. We were prey. We consolidated everything into the large communal tent that night. No one was sleeping alone. The storm hit with a vengeance. A full-blown blizzard that blotted out the world. The wind shrieked like a living thing. And the tent walls buckled and strained. And that's when all our modern technology, our shield against the unknown, died. First, the satellite phone went dead. No signal. Then, the laptops we were using to store the data started glitching, the screens filling with static before shutting down completely. Connor's drones were grounded, their batteries inexplicably drained. The GPR, the magnetometers, everything was useless. We were cut off, blind, and deaf, with nothing but a few headlamps and the thin nylon walls of the tent separating us from the raging storm and whatever was out there with us. Inside that tent, the 5 of us were packed together, the air thick with fear. The only sounds were the storm and our own ragged breathing. And for me, even without my headphones, the hum, it was louder now than ever before. It wasn't just in my ears, it was in the air. In the ground, a physical pressure that made the whole world seem to vibrate. And the whispers started. They weren't on my equipment anymore. They were in the wind. Woven into the fabric of the storm's howl were voices. Guttural, sibilant whispers that seemed to come from all directions at once. They were in a language I didn't recognize. But the intent was unmistakable. It was pure menace. We all heard it. I saw the look on their faces. Connor was muttering to himself, rocking back and forth. Liam was gripping a ski pole like a weapon, his knuckles white. Ben, the unflappable cameraman, was staring at the tent wall, his face a mask of primal terror. Anya was openly weeping, whispering prayers in Russian. The psychological breakdown, as the prompt calls it, was swift and total. Our little team, our professional unit, dissolved into 5 terrified animals trapped in a cage. Liam started blaming Anya, his paranoia twisting her historical knowledge into some kind of dark complicity. "You knew," he screamed at her over the wind. "You knew about this and you brought us here." Connor was convinced something was trying to get in, his eyes fixed on the door flap, ready to bolt. And then the pressure started. It began at the far end of the tent. The wall began to bulge inwards. Slowly, deliberately, as if a great, unseen weight was being pressed against it from the outside. There was no sound, just the silent, inexorable deformation of the nylon. Ben let out a choked gasp and scrambled backwards. Crab walking over our gear. The bulge moved slowly along the wall towards us. A wave of pressure in the fabric. This was the moment. This was the exact scenario the investigators in 1959 could never explain. Why would 9 experienced hikers cut their way out of a perfectly good tent into a deadly blizzard? Now I knew. It wasn't about getting away from something outside. It was about getting away from something that was trying to get in. The tent was no longer a shelter. It was a tomb. It was a trap. The instinct to get out, to flee into the open, however deadly, was overwhelming. "We have to go. Now," Liam shrieked, his voice cracking with sheer panic. He grabbed a hunting knife from his pack. "No, we stay together," Ben yelled, finding his voice for the first time. "We're dead out there." But it was too late. The primal terror had taken over. The part of your brain that thinks, that reasons, just shuts off. All that's left is the lizard brain. The part that screams, "Run." Liam didn't even try for the zipper. He just lunged at the wall of the tent, opposite the pressure wave, and slashed downwards. A huge gash opened up, and the blizzard roared in. A wall of white and ice and noise. The world dissolved into chaos. The prompt asks for the climax. The moment of confrontation or flight. For us, there was no confrontation. There was only flight. I don't remember making a conscious decision. One moment I was in the relative warmth of the tent. The next I was tumbling out through the gash into a hurricane of ice. The cold was a physical blow. So intense it felt like fire. I couldn't see anything. The world was a maelstrom of driving snow. I could hear screaming, but the wind tore the sound away as soon as it left my throat. I saw a fleeting shape, maybe Ben, maybe Connor, stumble and disappear into the whiteout. I saw the beam of a headlamp, Anya's, swing wildly and then vanish. I just ran. Downhill, away from the tent, away from the pressure, away from the whispers that were now screaming in my head. I ran blindly, falling, scrambling back up, my lungs burning, my face numb. I had no coat, no gloves, just the thermal layers I'd been wearing inside the tent. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that I was going to die. That this was how it ended for the original 9. You run from the incomprehensible terror in the tent, only to be claimed by the simple, brutal terror of the cold. I don't know how long I ran. Time ceased to have meaning. My world was reduced to the next panicked breath, the next stumbling step. I remember falling and not having the strength to get up. I remember lying in the snow, the blessed warmth of advanced hypothermia starting to creep into my limbs. The whispers in the wind finally starting to fade into a soothing hum. I was dying, and I almost welcomed it. And then, a light, a bright, piercing light, cutting through the blizzard, and a sound, not the hum, not the whispers, but the th-wump th-wump of a helicopter's rotor blades. It was the pilot. The storm had been so anomalous, so violent and sudden, that his dispatcher had ordered an early, precautionary check, a 1 in a million chance. He saw my headlamp, a tiny pinprick of fading light in the blizzard. The rescue team found me first, about a half-mile from the camp. They found Ben about 50 yards from me. He was dead, frozen solid. His face was a rictus of sheer, ultimate terror. He had made it out of the tent, but the mountain had claimed him. They found Liam closer to the tree line, almost a mile from the tent. He had fallen into a small ravine and his body was twisted at an unnatural angle. The official report said his death was caused by the fall and hypothermia. The medic who first examined him, however, told me later, in a hushed voice, that the ribs on his left side were crushed. as if he'd been squeezed in a giant vice. But there wasn't a single bruise on his skin. They found Connor's body next, near an old cedar tree. He had tried to climb it. His hands were raw and bloody. He was frozen to the trunk. They never found Anya. An extensive search turned up nothing. No body, no gear, no tracks. She had simply vanished into the storm. The official report lists her as missing, presumed dead. I know what I think. I think of the story from 1959, of the hiker Lyudmila Dubinina, found in a ravine with massive internal trauma, missing her tongue. I try not to think about what the whispers in the wind might have done to Anya if they caught her. The investigation was a joke. The official conclusion was a textbook case of paradoxical undressing due to severe hypothermia, leading to mass hysteria and a tragic accident. The slashed tent? A panic-induced mistake. The injuries? Consistent with a fall or the pressure of a small, localized avalanche. The lights we saw? Weather balloons. The hum I recorded? Magnetic interference. They had a neat, tidy, logical explanation for everything. They closed the case. But I was there. I know what I heard. I have the recordings, or what's left of them. The files are mostly corrupted. But sometimes, if I run them through enough filters, I can still hear it. The deep, resonant hum, and in the static between the shrieks of the wind. If I turn the volume all the way up and strain my ears, I can hear those other sounds. Those faint, sibilant crackles. The whispers. The prompt for this story asks for the lingering dread. The psychological aftermath. Well, here it is. I can't work as a sound engineer anymore. I can't wear headphones. The silence is too loud. Sometimes, on a quiet night, when the wind blows a certain way against the windowpane, I can hear that hum. That low, steady vibration. It's faint, but it's there. I live in a city now, surrounded by noise and people. I need the constant, meaningless chatter of urban life to drown out the memory of the mountain's voice. I have 3 locks on my door. I sleep with the lights on. Sometimes, I wake up in a cold sweat. The feeling of pressure on my chest. The memory of that tent wall bulging inwards. They never explained the threat. They never found the source of the lights, or the hum, or the voice in the wind. They never found what slashed our tent. What chased us into the storm. What crushed Liam's ribs without leaving a mark. And what took Anya. It's still up there, on that cold, windswept mountain in the middle of nowhere. It was there in 1959. It was there in 2023. And it's there now. It's waiting. And it doesn't like to be disturbed. So go on. Look out your window again. Look at the shadows between the streetlights. Listen to the sound of the wind. Everything seems normal, doesn't it? That's what we thought, too.